Hi everyone, my name is James. Welcome to King's Find Woodworking. This is part 2 of our shed building series, and today we are going to tackle the walls and siding. It's a big project, but when we break it up into 6 small pieces, it's not so bad. This particular one might be a little deceptive. It's actually really big. It's a 10 by 16 with 9-foot side walls, 12 feet of clearance on the inside, and it's got a 7-foot door. But these principles apply to any shed you want to build. All sizes build exactly the same way. The purpose of this shed building series is to give you an exact step-by-step tutorial so that you can build any size shed that you want. I will be following the International Building Code rules, the IBC, and nearly every jurisdiction in the country has adopted those regulations. My purpose is to make this tutorial easy enough to follow, even for someone who has no building experience, and the project is designed so that it can be done with a minimum number of tools. All you really need is a circular saw, a drill, a hammer, and some basic hand tools, and you can accomplish this project. Part 1 left with us finishing off the ground prep, the framing for the floor, and the decking itself. And today we're going to start on the walls. It's usually easiest to build one of the long walls first. We're going to start with the wall that goes against our property line, which is actually where my neighbor's shed is right now. We've been told that he's taking that down, but since it's not down yet, we're going to go ahead and put this wall up first because it's going to be easier to get this one out of the way. Maya is going to start the wall by cutting the pieces for the top plate and the sole plate. Those are the 2x4s that go on the top and the bottom of this wall. There are 2 top plates and only a single sole plate, but for now we're going to start by just cutting a single top plate. Now you might recall that our shed is 16 feet long, and in fact we are using a 16-foot 2x4 here, but she's cutting about 7 inches off of this, and the reason is because this wall doesn't go from one end of the floor to the other. It actually will go in between the front and back walls, so that's why it's being cut about 7 inches short. With the top plate and the sole plate both done, we'll need to put them both together and send them up on end and line the ends up flush so that we can mark out all of our locations for the studs, which will be 16 inches on center. You can see that Kyle has them lined up flush with the edge of that 2x4, and that 2x4 signifies where the front wall of the shed is going. I'm using this piece of plywood to pretend like it's siding, and I don't want the siding to come to the edge of that wall and pull my 16s over that way, but I want my edge of the siding to come to the edge of the building, and I want to pull 16s from there going back. That way my 16 inches on center will split nice and evenly at the 4-foot natural break of the plywood. And so if I simply hook my tape to the front wall's edge of the piece of 2x4 there and start pulling my 16 inches on center that way, then I know my siding will all the way to the front of the building, and it will still split on 16-inch centers all the way down, so my dividing points where the plywood breaks will be right in line with a joint where there's a stud. I wanted to let you know that we do sell a comprehensive set of 3D plans for all of the popular shed sizes, and we've actually done all the math for you, all the angles for the roof pitch, the measurements, the links, calculations, and everything. So all you have to do is follow the cut list, and we provide a complete materials list, and you can build a shed with our plans. And I have a link for that in the description down below. Alright, so my daughter has taken the sole plate down to the bottom and left the top plate in place. Now we're going to locate the studs. The first thing she's going to do is crown the studs, which means she's going to look and see which way they bow. We did the exact same thing for the floor, and we made sure that all of the floor joists bowed up with the curve facing up. For the wall, it's important. It doesn't matter if they bow in or they bow out, but they all need to bow in the same direction. That way when the siding goes on the outside, it's a nice smooth transition from one piece of siding to the next. That way you don't inadvertently put one bow up, the very next bow down, and you'd have a ripply wall looking down it. With all of the crowning completed and the studs in the right spot, it's time to nail them together. We typically put 2 16-penny galvanized nails. You can certainly drive these in by hand. If you have a nail gun, it goes a little bit quicker. And you do need to adjust your pressure, like we need to there. We didn't have our pressure set quite high enough on the compressor, so we went and adjusted that. But if that ever happens to you, you can just hand drive that in the rest of the way. And it's also important to use a galvanized nail. This is an outdoor shed, although it should stay dry on the inside. Galvanized nails are just going to last longer. And when you put the studs in, it's important to make sure that they line up dead center, right in the middle of that mark that you just made. Because that pencil mark that we made earlier, that's going to be the dividing point between two pieces of siding. And so it's important that we have a little bit of surface area for the nail to bite on each piece of siding that comes to that joint. With the first side nailed in completely, they'll need to pull it out of the way so that they can get up on the deck and work to nail the other side in. Once again, 2 16-penny nails per joint, and it's important to make sure that the pencil line is lined up right in the middle of that stud. And of course we would like to stay flush. That just makes for a better quality wall when we're all done. Hey, if you all out there like watching our videos and like the things that we do, if you would just take 1 minute and hit that subscribe button, we would really appreciate it. And if you click the bell notification icon, that lets you know in advance whenever we have videos coming out. And hitting that subscribe button is really the only way that our channel can grow. A lot of times I forget to ask for folks to do that, but it really does mean a big deal to us. So if you can do that, thank you. Alright, so the first wall framework is nailed together. And one of the cool things about shed building is that even though it's a big project, it goes really fast. You can cut the pieces and nail together a wall in just a few minutes. At this point, we're going to pull the wall all the way down to the very corner of our decking. We know the deck, frame, and floor there is completely square because we built it that way. And we're just going to pull this to the corner and then check square quickly on this before we put our siding on. Having a perfectly square wall is critically important because if it's not, nothing else will come together. And one thing that helps during the build of a project like this is to put the siding on before you raise up the wall, in which case the wall won't fall out of square during the build process. And remember, getting it square is as simple as just measuring outside to outside from diagonal to diagonal, and the two diagonals have to be equal. If you have that, you have a square project. Okay, so pay attention to what the girls are doing at the bottom here. They have some scrap 2x4s, and they're keeping them flush with the bottom of the wall. But I actually want the siding to come down and match up flush with those 2x4s on the bottom, because I want the siding to hang down the bottom. And on the side, we have another 2x4 scrap here, and that's to make sure that the siding comes all the way to the edge, to the front of the building, like we were talking about. That's why we had a 3.5-inch offset going backwards before we started pulling our 16 inches on center. So this first piece of siding has to be offset by 3.5 inches down to the bottom and 3.5 inches off to the side. Since the two side walls are interior walls, they're going to go between the front and back wall. Hopefully that makes sense. And since we did that pull back there, you can see the very center of this seam of siding goes right down the center of the stud. It appears to go all the way to the right side, but that's just the under flap. The next piece of siding will go over the top of that one. And here at the bottom, the girls are marking with a chalk line where the stud is in order to know where to nail. That way the nails just go in the stud and they don't miss down below. They'll also do the same along the side. This one side has to be marked so that they know where to put the nails. And then we just have to follow our regular nailing schedule, which is anywhere along the perimeter of the plywood, which is this bottom row. We need to put a nail in every 6 inches. That'll keep with the IBC code. So along this bottom part and along the side and along the seam, put a nail every 6 inches. And then in the field of the plywood, or siding in this case, we just need to put the nails about every 12 inches. And this is the middle, so I'm trying to space them about every 12 inches or so. So as we put this next piece of siding in place, you'll get to see how they overlap at the seams. Most types of panel siding do this, and it really helps with water resistance. It'll help it to shed water out there. And you can see that even when they do overlap, we still have that vertical line going down, so it just blends in with the remainder of the vertical lines, so you can't really tell that there's a seam there. Now Maya's going to continue the chalk line here so she knows where to nail for this piece as well. And of course we have to nail at the top too, and even though the top is the perimeter of this piece of siding, you can tell we can't put a nail every 6 inches because there's simply nothing behind the siding. So in this case you just put a nail wherever you can, and then along both sides you'll go ahead and put one every 6 inches. Okay, so once we have finished the bottom course of siding all the way across, you'll see there's still a section up top where there is no siding, and that's because I chose a 9-foot wall, but I only had 8-foot tall siding available to me. So Maya's measured that out, and she's going to snap a chalk line and cut our pieces of siding that are going to fill in along the top. Now it's important to cut this, once you measure it, to cut it about 1.5 inches tall, taller than just from the siding to the edge of the top plate, outside side of the top plate, because we're going to put a double top plate. And I actually made a mistake here, and I told her to cut it flush with the top plate without thinking, but we'll correct that later. You see it's flush with the top plate, but it does need to stick up 1.5 inches further. If we have a horizontal break in vertical siding, we have to put in some flashing in order to keep it watertight. This is the flashing that we use. This is called Z flashing, sort of shaped like the letter Z, I suppose. And it's a 3/8 inch thick, so it'll get just over this 3/8 inch siding, and it will go in there just like that. And that'll keep the shed watertight on the inside. We'll follow the same nailing schedule here, or at least a similar one. We're going to get 6 inches along the outer perimeter where we can, and then on the inside in the field I'm going to go ahead and put 2, even though it's a little bit closer than normal, because a single nail isn't really enough. And then Cy will go ahead and cut a piece of flashing for the other side. Since the flashing comes in 10-foot lengths but the shed is 16 feet long, we'll need to cut this piece probably around 6'6", something like that. That way we can give it about 6 inches of overlap. That's code. Whenever you have flashing, you want to give it about 6 inches of overlap. And then we'll just continue all the way to the end this way. And this is going to complete the very first wall. So this wall is complete, and it's perfect with one exception. Remember, this top piece of siding should have come up 1.5 inches above the top plate there, because I will be putting on a secondary top plate, and I would like to hide that with siding as well. And for this particular wall, since we won't be able to access it easily later, we probably can after our neighbor takes down his shed, but I thought it would be best to just go ahead and paint this now before we raise it up into place. So we have the advantage of having a nice square wall if we put the siding on while it's down, but we have the disadvantage of the fact that we have to pick up a much heavier wall in order to raise it into place. Given those two options, I would always see if I could get a hand in order to get it raised and build the siding in place while the wall is on the ground. That is pretty much the standard, but it could be done either way. And once we put it into place, you can see that the bottom lip of siding there went down over the edge of the deck by about 3.5 inches. And that's just going to keep the bottom of this thing watertight. And I've got to tap it over into place in order to get it perfectly aligned from left to right. That space in the front there is where the front wall is going to go. And that's why we had to do our measurements offset by 3.5 inches back. So once we have everything in place perfectly, we'll go ahead and nail the floor of it down. Then we'll take a couple of long 2x4s and tack them into the side. We'll tack just a single one into the side for now so that it can pivot up and down. And then I will go over to the wall. We'll kind of push the wall forward or backward to try to achieve level. And that'll necessitate that I have to raise or lower this stud here, this extra 2x4 that I have. And once I get it level, we'll just tack this in place. And then after confirming level, we'll put an extra nail high and an extra nail low. And that'll be some good security in case we have to leave this wall up overnight. The wind isn't going to blow it down and damage anything. And we'll just repeat that process on the other side. And there you have it. One wall is fully complete. And for the rest of it, it's much the same thing. I'll go over the rest of it a little bit quicker here, and I'll just kind of point out some of the specific details. And here they are building the back wall. So this is different from the two side walls in that the back wall is going to go edge to edge all the way from one edge of the decking to the other. So in this case, we're going to bring the siding up on the sides perfectly flush with that edge 2x4 stud. The bottom still needs the 3.5 inch overlap at the bottom so they can overhang the decking a little bit to give us water tightness. But on the edge of the stud here, you can see it's lined up flush. So there's a difference between this one and the sidewalls. And here you can notice that I did remember to put that extra little piece of 1.5 inch up on the siding on the right-hand side so it'll cover my other top plate. And right now they're just kind of rotating this out of the way so we can stand it up against our woodworking shop and build the very next wall. I need that nice big flat deck surface in order to build the next wall. So they're just going to kind of temporarily put this out of the way.
You're good. Cool.
The next part is going to be the front wall. The front wall is going to contain the doors. And so they're going to start like we did with the other walls. We're going to pull 16 inches on center. In this case, we're pulling them from the edge of the 2x4 itself, from the top plate and the sole plate, because we don't have any overlap of siding. The siding goes right to the edge of this since it's a front wall. Maya's going to go ahead and crown them at this point. And then we're going to put them all in place and we'll kind of identify what's going on here. So it's going to start off like normal. We're just going to nail one side down the whole way. And then we're going to get to a certain point, and this is going to be where the doorway goes. So these are little studs that are going to go on top of a header, and the header is what braces up the framework for the opening. Maya's going to lay the header in. Now those top studs are short studs. They're called cripple studs. And a header, in our case, and in most cases, consists of a piece of dimensional lumber, like a 2x6 in this case, then a 1/2 inch thick piece of plywood, and then another piece of dimensional lumber. Those three thicknesses together are the thickness of a stud. And so that's what the header is going to be made of. And with that header in place, Sai can go ahead and nail those cripple studs in. Next, the girls will have to nail that header together to make it one continuous solid piece. And the header basically spans the distance of the door opening and allows the cripple studs to go ahead and continue carrying the roof from that point on up. So the header is a structural component, and it's always got to be assembled out of something like this. I think the nailing schedule for a header is a pair of nails every 16 inches. I've never felt like that was enough, so I usually put them every 6 to 8. And then she's going to rotate the header over, of course, and nail it in from the backside. It's imperative that this header acts as one piece, even though it's 3 separate components. Once that's in place, we're going to put another stud on the inside. This stud is called a jack stud. It's also called a trimmer stud, so you may have heard it referred to as a trimmer. But this jack stud is going to go next to a full-length stud, and the full-length stud is called the king stud. So she's nailing the king stud into the jack stud, and she's angling the nails just a little bit because they're 3¼ inch nails, but we only have 3 inches of wood to go through. And then she's going to go ahead and nail the king stud and the jack stud into the bottom, which is the sole plate. And you should be able to see that that jack stud is sort of like jacking up the header. It's holding the header, preventing the header from sliding down. We are going to nail that header into this king stud, but it's a good idea to have that jack stud underneath it there. In fact, that's code, because that gives it a whole lot more support than these nails will. And Sai is taking the time to put 3 nails in the top 2x6 of the header and 3 nails in the bottom 2x6 of the header. That way the header is securely fastened to the king stud. And finally, we will need to secure those cripple studs down into the header, and we'll do this with toe nailing. Proper toe nailing is done with the gun at about a 45-degree angle, and you have to have the nail insert into the cripple stud at a point high enough where it doesn't split the cripple stud. With the wall frame complete, it has been scooted right into the exact corner, and they're going to take measurements to make sure that we have achieved a perfect square. And that's just done with measuring diagonally to diagonally. And then we're going to put the siding on, and you see the same thing. The siding is going to overlap 3.5 inches on the bottom, but since this is a front wall, it's going to be flush with the edge of the 2x4s. So overlapping at the bottom, but flush with the sides. Once the siding is complete, Maya will need to cut a hole in it in order to get a router bit in and trim out the door opening. So you can just plunge a circular saw in 4 times, or you could even drill a hole if you want. Just something to have access to get a router bit in. And we just use a flush trim router bit, and it just makes really quick work of this and creates an absolute perfect door opening. And the exact same procedure that we used to create a door opening here could be used to create a door opening anywhere in the shed, and it'd be the same thing to put a window in as well. The only exception with the window is that there would be a set of cripple studs below the window in addition to cripple studs on top of the header above the window. But the procedure is exactly the same, and you would end up cutting it out with the same technique here as well. I'd like to take a second to say hi and give a shout out to all of our members of our community group on Facebook. It's called King's Fine Woodworking Community. There's a link in the description. If you're a woodworker and you're interested in joining, it's a great place to share your work and get advice on projects, things like that, anything woodworking related. And it's a great community. It's been around for a year and a half or so. There's about 20,000 members. It's a private community, so people from the outside can't come in and fill it with advertising or anything like that. It's just for woodworkers to share ideas and projects with. So I'll put a link to that again in the description. And that's basically how to cut out a doorway. On the bottom, that's going to be cut out as well, but it's not going to be cut out yet. We need this whole thing intact. The sole plate needs to stay in place in order to keep this wall square to get it up. Once the wall is up and in place, we'll cut that bottom part of the opening out. Off camera, we built the other side wall. You can see that one laying at the bottom there. And we've dropped the second wall that we built back down. This is the back wall, and that's what they're raising up into place now. It's important to go slow when lifting these walls and make sure that the flap, the extra siding that hangs down, goes just over the edge, but that the 2x4 sole plate that's on the bottom still stays on that deck. And once it's fully raised into the vertical position, we'll slide it all the way back to the left and put it in place. And then when that's done, Sai will go ahead and tack the first couple of nails down. Then she'll go over to the other side and do the same thing. We did have to take that brace out on that side that was holding that left side wall in place and keeping it square. And you can see it's leaning a little bit out of square, but we're going to pull that back into square here in just a minute. Okay, so when we pull that back wall up vertically up close to this side wall here, that automatically pulls it into square because we know that the back wall is square in the left-to-right orientation. It was hard to get a nail gun in there because the space was tight, and so Sai is using a palm nailer in order to nail these two walls together. A palm nailer is a pretty convenient tool. It's about $40 or $50, and it allows you to get into pretty tight spots, and it nails in very fast. And here we're just going to nail this from the bottom all the way up to the top, and that's going to kind of secure those two walls together. With that wall held in place, we're going to go to the other side wall. And you notice all we have to do is lift the walls straight up. So you should take note when you're building these walls to make sure that when you build them, you build the bottom side down towards where it needs to go and the top side where it needs to go, so that when you lift it in place, it's already oriented in the right direction. And I think now for the first time you can kind of get a good view of how the siding is hanging down over or below a good portion of that decking. And that's going to make sure that any water or anything that splashes up isn't going to get up and get underneath and get into our shed. So we've got this thing pushed into place nice and snug against that back wall. And typically we'll tack one side in and then we'll move to the other side. We'll push the wall all the way tight into position where it goes, and we'll tack that in, and then we'll make sure that the middle is pushed in tight as well. And once we make sure that happens, just in case the wall were to bow outwards, you can see Kyle is pushing the middle in to keep it nice and tight. And then Sai's going to go ahead on the inside and put a couple of nails in every bay all the way across. And then, of course, it's back to nailing the two walls together Once again, this side is just as tight as the last side because the studs here are in identical position to the studs over there. And you can see how this nail is going. This nail from the sidewall is going all the way through, and it's going into the stud, the end stud on the back wall. And we'll do that all the way up. And I wanted to show you something here. Sometimes you'll do these and you'll end up with a little tiny gap where it probably could have been pulled in tighter up top. Here's the easiest way to fix that. I use these GRK screws. This is a 4-inch screw, so it's a 5/16 by 4. Very big, powerful, aggressive screw, and so much faster and easier than nails. You can get a good look at that screw there. And so Kyle will just go up top, and you don't have to pre-drill these or anything, and we'll just drill this through in place of a nail at the top. So anywhere where we have these gaps, we're going to zoom in so you can see this here. Anywhere we have these gaps, you can put these screws in and it'll really pull these walls together tight, and it'll keep everything perfectly square, just like that. So that's a nice handy thing to have whenever you're building a shed or framing any kind of wall. With 3 of the walls in place, it's a good time to go around and nail down all of the siding. And I just put 1 nail in each siding section, and that goes directly into the framework of the decking itself, and that kind of holds the wall a little bit extra securely there. And we'll do this all the way around the perimeter, and also where the end siding overlapped, we're going to nail up that side, and that also secures these 2 walls together. And finally, we will go ahead and put in the front wall. The last wall is always a bit of a challenge because it's not on the deck itself, so we can't just raise it. We actually have to lift it directly into place. That makes it a little bit tougher. But if you can get a few hands to help you, it's not so bad. So we got that set up and pushed into place. The framework for this end wall, of course, goes in front of the framework for the side walls. Remember, we had to cut the side walls a little bit short for that. And you can see that sidewall on the right is leaning to the back again, but we'll pull it together. And we've got a gap down here too, right off the bat. So we're going to pull that together with a screw. And then Sai's going to go ahead and nail down this sole plate. Now we don't want to nail down the area in the threshold area, the opening to the door. We don't want to nail that down because we want to be able to walk in and out there and have it smooth. So we'll keep that free so that we can cut that bottom part of the sole plate off later. But it had to stay in place in order for this wall to maintain its integrity and stay in one piece. And then the usual routine here, we're going to nail the walls together up the whole side, and anywhere that there's a gap or it didn't pull together tight, we're going to go ahead and use those large GRK screws to pull it together. I just wanted to mention once again that if you're looking to have a shed made and you want to do it yourself, we do have plans. We have comprehensive 3D plans. All the math is done. It's for all the popular shed sizes. You don't have to do any calculations for the roof or any of these sides. It'll come with a complete materials list, cut list, everything that you need. All the dimensions laid out for you so you can just cut it and go. And there's a link to that in the description. With all the walls securely attached and fastened together, it is time to cut out the bottom portion of the sole plate that's in the doorway opening. You can do this with a handsaw, works great. I happen to have a reciprocating saw here on site, so I'm going to use this. Just be careful when you're cutting down through it not to cut into your decking. It's going to look ugly if you do. Just make sure you get through the 2x4 and nothing else if you can help it. And once you get that out, then we're going to need to trim off this siding because the siding is in the way as well. And I have a little Japanese saw here since we do woodworking, of course, and it's real easy to cut it off with this. You can also cut it off just as fast with a handsaw. Once that's cut off, I actually want to put it back in place there, but I need to trim that 1.5 inches off of the top of it where the stud was. That way it's going to continue to line up with the bottom of my siding everywhere else, but the top part's not overlapping and hanging up into my walkway area. So I'm just going to use the same 2 pieces, trim the top part off, and put them right back into place. This is such an awesome DIY project, I just can't stress it enough. We had a quote from a local shed builder. Actually, they're a national shed builder, and for one this size, 16 by 10 with 9-foot sidewalls, it came in at $7,900, which is a lot of money. I think we have a little over $2,000 in materials in this, so you can see the savings are huge, and you could put together something smaller like an 8 by 10 for just a few $100, compared to spending thousands and having somebody do it for you. So just some thoughts on that. All right, now we're getting to the second top plate, and this top plate is what really locks these walls together strong. You can see by the way we constructed the sidewall here is that it's 7 inches shorter than our 16-foot length. However, when we cut our top plate here, our second top plate, we're cutting this at the full 16-foot length. Therefore, it's going to overlap the wall below it, and it's going to overlap the front and back walls. And nailing this into those is what really gives those walls a lot of strength and prevents them from pulling apart. All right, so Kyle is balanced precariously up on the top of this ladder here, and the first thing we'll do is we will nail this into the front wall. So I usually put 3 nails in this location, and then I put 1 nail in each bay all the way across to hold this securely to this top wall, to the existing top plate. Another reason for having a double top plate is because that top plate, well, let's take a moment here, Sai is nailing this side in, and same technique here, we want to get about 3 nails into that joint, and that will secure it so that this back wall can never push away to the left. It's kind of locked permanently to the side wall. And what I was saying is another reason for having a double top plate is because the rafters themselves that carry the roof, they have to land on this top plate. So we don't want any sort of deflection in the top plate. We want it to maintain rigidity, and having a double top plate helps with the strength of that. Now we're going to move to the other side wall, which is the first wall I put up, which you'll notice here, this is the one I didn't let the siding stick up 1.5 inches like I should have. So after we put this top plate in, we're actually going to go on the outside over there, and we're going to add a 1.5-inch strip of siding all the way across in order to make sure that it stays covered. I do expect the rafters to hang down below that, so I don't think there's going to be any weather issues, but when you're cutting this siding, it's best if you can let it overhang, come up above the top about 1.5 inches to cover these second top plates. But same nailing schedule here, we'll put 3 in the joint, and then we'll put 1 in each bay all the way across. You have to be careful when you're nailing. If you nail too close to the edge of the board, sometimes you get a split like that right there. That one's probably not a big deal, but if it were bad or if it were a little more critical, I might replace that. Just be prepared for that, and try to keep your nails in a little bit from the edge. Now it's time to fill in the rest of the top plates. These don't have a whole lot of function. They're not really locking anything down, but they're bringing the top part of the wall all up to the same height. And of course they will still carry the gable end of the roof, so they do have some load-bearing responsibility as well. And that is going to complete these 9-foot sidewalls. The final step of the wall building is to just make sure that the walls themselves, when they came to the top, maintained their squareness. So we're going to do a quick measurement from diagonal to diagonal and make sure that it works. In which case, if it didn't, we can always squeeze the 2 sides together and temporarily tack a board up before we begin with our roof. But in this case, they did stay the same. And that includes this part of the build. I hope you guys have enjoyed this so far, and I really hope you'll come back and watch the next installment. So long for today, and thanks for watching.